What if I told you that the most explosive accusations in the biggest rap battle of the century were sourced from a fired employee with a grudge, and the biggest rapper on the planet swallowed those lies whole without checking a single fact? Because that is exactly what just happened. The entire foundation of the most destructive musical confrontation in modern history was built on fabricated intelligence from a disgruntled ex-worker, and now that the truth is bleeding out from someone who was actually inside the building, the fallout is going to be unlike anything we have seen since this whole saga began. We are talking about a former insider who helped craft one of the most celebrated albums in hip-hop history, stepping forward to dismantle every single narrative that millions of people swallowed during the heat of battle. The domestic violence accusations, the paternity claims, the leaked tracks, the AI controversies. All of it traces back to a single poison well, and the person who drank from it never once questioned the water. Kendrick Lamar was the target of the most reckless disinformation campaign in hip-hop history, and Drake pulled the trigger with his eyes wide shut. But before we rip the lid off this thing and expose what has been hiding in plain sight, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. One click tells the algorithm to push this to every corner of the internet. Share it on your platform of choice. Let somebody know what is about to go down today. Because what we are unpacking is not just a story. It is a forensic dismantling of a narrative that millions of people bought into, and the damage control that is about to follow from Drake and his entire operation is going to be absolutely nuclear. Alright, so here is where we are. If you have been following the fallout from the most destructive rap confrontation in modern memory, you know that the aftermath has been just as chaotic as the battle itself. We have been tracking the reverberations, the lawsuits, the leaked tracks, the finger-pointing, and the endless media circuit where everybody involved has been trying to spin their version of events. But what just surfaced from a conversation between two people who were actually inside the building, who were present for the creation of the projects that defined an era, is so explosive that it reframes everything we thought we understood about why certain shots were fired and who is really pulling the strings behind the curtain. This is not speculation. This is not a blogger reading tea leaves from the outside. This is first-hand testimony from people who were in the room when the music was made, when the relationships were formed, and when the cracks that eventually became fault lines first started to appear. And at the center of it all is Kendrick Lamar, the man who has refused to break his silence while everyone around him keeps talking, keeps posting, keeps filling the air with their version of events. Let me set the stage. We are talking about revelations coming from a figure who is deeply embedded in the ecosystem. This is someone who helped A&R one of the most celebrated albums in hip-hop history. Someone who was in the aftermath fold, who was around during the sessions, who witnessed the relationships and the dynamics firsthand. This individual has been collaborating with another voice in the commentary space, and together they have been meticulously following the trail of a story that just keeps getting deeper. And what he just laid out on the table changes the entire complexion of the post-battle landscape. Because up until this point, we have been operating under the assumption that the accusations flying back and forth between Kendrick Lamar and Drake were rooted in some version of reality. Maybe exaggerated, maybe weaponized, but rooted in something tangible. What we just learned is that the most damaging claims were not rooted in anything at all. They were manufactured, deliberately, by someone with a score to settle. Now, the conversation begins with a discussion about a rapper who has been very vocal about his frustration with Kendrick Lamar. This rapper has been doing interviews, appearing on podcasts, making his feelings known publicly. And the core of his grievance is straightforward. He cannot get Kendrick on the phone. He has reached out through every available channel. He has contacted the people around him. He has tried the direct route, the indirect route, the intermediary route. Nothing. Silence. Radio silence. And for someone who had a working relationship with Kendrick Lamar, who collaborated on records, who was told at one point that he was an inspiration, that silence is deafening. The insider confirms that he has been tracking this dynamic closely, and he understands exactly where the frustration comes from. He himself experienced a version of it. But he also understands something that the frustrated rapper apparently does not. And that understanding is what separates a measured perspective from a public grievance campaign against the very person who inspired him. But here is where it gets fascinating. Because the insider does not just validate the frustration. He contextualizes it with a level of nuance that has been completely absent from the broader conversation. He gives us the other side of the equation. And the other side is this. Kendrick Lamar is not singling anyone out. He is not deliberately freezing specific people. He does that to everyone. It is not personal. It is structural. It is how he operates as a human being navigating an impossible level of fame and expectation. When a chapter closes, the access closes with it. The phone stops ringing. The texts go unanswered. Not out of malice. Not out of spite. Not out of arrogance. But because Kendrick is operating on a frequency that does not accommodate the weight of every previous relationship pulling at his time and energy simultaneously. And the insider gets this. He explicitly says he never took it personally. He understands. He has been around long enough to recognize that nobody can prepare you for the level of accomplishment and visibility that this artist has reached. When you become that person, the one who sits at the absolute apex of the entire genre, the demands on your attention become physically impossible to manage. You cannot talk to everybody. You cannot maintain every bridge. You cannot keep every door open. And the people who cannot accept that, the people who feel entitled to permanent access because they were present during a specific era, they are the ones who end up bitter, doing interviews, airing grievances, and ultimately choosing sides in a battle they were never asked to join. The insider frames it with an analogy that lands perfectly. He says it is like a club. Some people feel like they should not have to wait in line. They got waved in once before, and now they expect that wave to be permanent. They expect the velvet rope to lift every time they approach. And when it does not, when the door person looks at them and says the list is full tonight, they take it as a personal affront. They cannot comprehend that the access was contextual. It was tied to a specific time, a specific project, a specific set of circumstances. And when those circumstances changed, the access changed with it. That is not cruelty from the Compton artist. That is the natural life cycle of professional relationships in an industry where everyone is orbiting something larger than themselves. But wait, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The conversation shifts from access and relationships to something far more explosive. And what gets revealed next is the kind of information that makes you question everything you consumed during the most talked about musical confrontation of the decade. The insider starts talking about the allegations that Drake leveled during the battle. Specifically, the claims that were made about Kendrick Lamar's personal life. The accusations about his relationship with his partner. The suggestion that his children were not biologically his. The implication that there was domestic violence in his home. All of it. Every single sordid claim that Drake broadcast to millions of people and that was consumed as gospel by a significant portion of the listening public. And here is the bombshell. Those claims were not just wrong. They were fed deliberately by a disgruntled former employee. Someone who had worked inside the aftermath or TD infrastructure. Someone who, after departing that environment under circumstances that remain unclear, ended up working with Drake and his team. And this individual, bitter about whatever led to their exit, started funneling information to Drake. But here is the critical part. The information was completely fabricated. It was garbage. It was the kind of poison that a vindictive person manufactures when they want to inflict damage from a distance and does not care who gets caught in the crossfire. And Drake, the person receiving this intelligence, the biggest rapper in the opposing camp, did not verify it. Drake did not question it. Drake did not pause for even a fraction of a second to consider the source or the motivation behind it. He took it and he ran with it. He put it on wax. He broadcast it to the entire world. He stood in front of millions of people and repeated allegations that originated from a fired worker with an axe to grind against Kendrick Lamar. Let that sink in for a moment. Really sit with it. The most damaging accusations of the entire battle, the ones that made global headlines, the ones that dominated social media discourse for weeks, the ones that shaped public perception of Kendrick Lamar and his family, were based on information that came from a dismissed employee with a personal vendetta. That is not journalism. That is not strategic battle preparation. That is recklessness on a scale that borders on pathological. And the fact that it has taken this long for the sourcing to come to light tells you everything about how information travels in this era. The accusation gets amplified. The retraction gets buried. The lie circles the globe before the truth even gets its shoes on. Drake knew this. He understood the mechanics of virality well enough to weaponize them, but apparently not well enough to recognize when he himself was being weaponized by someone with a grudge against Kendrick Lamar. And the insider is visibly disturbed by this. Not in a performative, rage for the camera way. In a genuine, deeply unsettled way that comes from knowing the people involved and understanding the damage that was done. He talks about Kendrick Lamar's partner, the woman who was dragged through the mud in front of the entire world, and his tone shifts to something protective. He has met her. He has interacted with her. He knows her personally. And when he heard the accusations that Drake was leveling against her and against the Compton artist, his reaction was disbelief. Pure, unfiltered disbelief. Because the woman he knows, the woman he encountered in real life, is someone who carries herself with an effortless grace that completely contradicts the narrative that was being pushed. She is out in public, living her life, unbothered by the noise. She does not operate with a star persona. She does not carry herself like someone who is hiding anything. She is simply present, real, grounded, and completely unintimidated by the circus that the opposing camp and their supporters constructed around her family. The insider recounts a specific encounter that drives this point home with visceral clarity. He was at a mall. Century City, if you are familiar with the Los Angeles landscape. He saw Kendrick's partner with one of the children. She was pushing a stroller. Just living her life. He approached, not even certain she would remember who he was, given the time and distance that had passed. And her response was immediate, warm, and slightly incredulous that he would even question whether she knew him. She looked at him as if he was crazy for thinking she might not recognize him. Of course she knew who he was. She showed him the baby. He looked at the child and saw the resemblance immediately. Beautiful. Healthy. The spitting image of the father. And in that single moment, standing in a mall parking lot looking at a baby who was undeniably, unmistakably the child of the man whom Drake had publicly accused of not being the father. Every single accusation that had been broadcast to the world dissolved into what it always was. Baseless, malicious fiction. He asked her to pass along a message. He wanted to connect with the Compton artist. He wanted to have a conversation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loaded. Nothing about the battle or the politics or the industry chess game. Just a check-in. A human moment between two people who had shared space and history. And did the message get returned? No. Did he reach back out? No. The silence continued. And the insider is completely fine with that. At peace with it, even. Because he understands the architecture of the situation at a level that most people commenting on it do not. He understands that Kendrick Lamar is navigating territory that no manual exists for. Nobody can prepare you for being that person. Nobody can prepare you for the weight of being the one who sits at the absolute pinnacle of an entire cultural movement. And when you are carrying that weight, you cannot respond to every knock on the door. You cannot return every call. You cannot maintain every thread. The silence is not rejection. It is self-preservation at a scale that most people will never have to comprehend, and, honestly, should be grateful they never have to. But here is what the insider cannot forgive. And what he will not forgive. What he makes crystal clear in this conversation. Drake took fabricated intelligence from a disgruntled ex-employee and weaponized it against a family. He did not just go after Kendrick Lamar professionally. He went after his partner personally. He went after his children. He questioned the paternity of Kendrick's kids on a public record. He suggested violence in his home based on the word of someone he never met and never verified. And every single one of those claims traced back to a source that was not just unreliable, but actively malicious, a person who was feeding poison to settle a personal score and who probably laughed about the chaos they were creating. The insider confirms that when the identity of this individual was discovered, the reaction from people who actually knew the situation was disbelief. Not at the fact that someone would do this, but at the fact that the opposing camp was gullible enough to build an entire battle strategy around it. They were laughing. Genuinely laughing. Because the idea that anyone would take that information and run with it without a single verification step was absurd to the point of comedy. Now, let me broaden this out, because the insider makes a comparison that is going to ruffle some feathers, but it is one of the most incisive observations I have heard in all of the post-battle commentary that has flooded the internet. He says that what we are witnessing with Kendrick Lamar is the same pattern we have seen with another legendary figure in hip-hop, a figure who has been accused of the exact same thing for decades. Inaccessibility. Distance. Cutting people off when the working relationship ends. Not returning calls. Not maintaining the access that former collaborators feel they are owed. And the comparison is apt because the criticism is identical across both cases. People who had access during a specific window feel entitled to that access permanently. They feel that because they were present during a certain era, because they contributed to a certain project, because they were in the room when history was being made, they should retain VIP status for life. And when that status is revoked, which it inevitably is because no one can sustain that level of access for anyone who ever crossed their orbit, they do not process it as a natural evolution of a professional relationship. They process it as betrayal. They process it as disrespect. And from that perceived betrayal, resentment grows like a weed. And from resentment, you get exactly the kind of public commentary, the podcast appearances, the interview tours, the subtle jabs disguised as honest reflection that we have been watching play out in real time against Kendrick Lamar. The insider says something that I think is worth repeating because it captures the entire dynamic in a single breath. He says that for some people, the highlight of their life is the past. And because the highlight of their life is the past, they cannot understand why things cannot be the same forever. They are anchored to a moment that has already passed, and they spend their energy trying to recreate it rather than building something new. And when the person they are trying to reconnect with has already moved on, has already evolved past that moment, has already become something that no longer fits in the container of that old relationship, the frustration curdles into something uglier. It becomes the fuel for public grievance. It becomes the subtext of every interview where someone says they cannot get Kendrick on the phone. And ultimately, it becomes the reason someone aligns themselves with Drake in a battle they had no stake in, simply because he is the one that picks up when they call. And here is where it gets even more layered. Because the insider also touches on something that has been lingering in the background of this entire saga, like a low-frequency hum that you cannot quite identify. The leaks. The rollout strategy. The question of what was intentional and what was not. He mentions that one of the most talked about diss tracks from Drake, one of the records that became a central piece of the narrative, was not actually supposed to come out. It was a leak. And once it leaked, Drake leaned into it rather than pulling it back. But the leak itself raises profound questions about the infrastructure of Drake's camp. How did it get out? Who pushed it? Was it a strategic release disguised as an accident to generate buzz while maintaining plausible deniability, or was it genuinely an unauthorized breach that exposed the chaos behind the curtain? And if it was a breach, what does that tell you about the operational security of a camp that was simultaneously trying to project dominance and control over the narrative while its own vault was springing leaks from every direction? And then there is the other track. The one that dropped in the early stages of the battle and immediately set the tone for what was to come from Drake. The insider notes something that a lot of people noticed at the time, but that got buried in the noise. The original version had a strange quality to it. The vocals had a texture that did not quite sound natural. It was Drake, clearly, but something was off. The vocal production had a synthetic quality that made people question whether there was processing involved, whether there was AI assistance at play, whether what they were hearing was entirely organic. And the fact that this question even existed tells you everything you need to know about the foundation of Drake's strategy. It was shaky from the very beginning. The rollout was inconsistent. Tracks were being revised and re-released after they had already been consumed and dissected by the public. Content was being modified after the fact, which is the equivalent of changing your answer on a test after the teacher has already started grading it. The sequencing was off. The quality control was absent. And in the middle of all that instability, the opposing artist was publicly challenging Kendrick Lamar to drop 50 songs, to empty the vault, to release everything he has been holding. When his own camp was the one with preloaded diss tracks and unauthorized leaks springing from every direction. And then there was the AI debacle. And I need you to remember this one because it perfectly encapsulates Drake's entire approach to this battle. A track surfaced that was supposed to be from the Compton artist. It appeared online and immediately people on the opposing side co-signed it as authentic. They said it was real. They said it was a legitimate release. They said the only reason it was not better was because he had fallen off. They ran with it. They amplified it. They used it as evidence. And then the actual creator came forward. A random person on the internet. Someone who freely admitted they made it in their bedroom and could not even rap at the level required to fool anyone with functioning ears. Drake's camp had tried to pass off a fan-made, AI-assisted track as a legitimate release, and when it exploded in their faces, the silence that followed from Drake was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Not a retraction. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement that they had been caught manufacturing a narrative. Just silence. The same silence they criticize Kendrick Lamar for, but applied selectively only when it serves their interests. The Insider reflects on one particular track from Drake during this conversation, and his assessment is nuanced in a way that I think is worth noting. He acknowledges that there was a concept behind the track that was, in theory, genuinely interesting. The idea of rapping from the perspective of multiple people, of adopting different viewpoints to deliver a layered message to the Compton artist. It was a departure from the usual first-person, confessional approach. And in isolation, the concept had intellectual merit. It showed a willingness to experiment with form. But the execution was catastrophic. The bars were not there. The delivery was not there. The resonance was not there. It was a track that tried to be clever and ended up being the exact opposite of clever. It was a swing for the fences that resulted in a strikeout so emphatic that it echoed through the rest of the battle. And while the Insider can appreciate the ambition on a theoretical level, he is crystal clear that the final product was indefensible. The record did not work. It did not land. It did not resonate with anyone except a small group of people who were determined to find merit in anything the opposing camp released, regardless of quality. Now, let me pull all of these threads together, because what we are looking at is not just a collection of isolated incidents or separate controversies. We are looking at a pattern. A comprehensive, interconnected pattern of recklessness, deception, and manipulation that defined Drake's entire approach to this battle from beginning to end. He took fabricated intelligence from a disgruntled ex-employee and turned it into the centerpiece of his assault on Kendrick Lamar. He questioned the paternity of a man's children based on information from a source he never verified and never even met. He accused a woman of being a victim of violence based on the word of someone with a vendetta against her family. He had leaks springing from his own camp while simultaneously accusing the Compton artist of hoarding material. His team co-signed a fake AI track as a legitimate release. He revised and re-released his own diss records because the first versions were not ready for public consumption. He challenged Kendrick to release 50 songs when his own vault was the one leaking from every seam. And, through all of it, he maintained a posture of confidence, of superiority, of moral authority, as if the sheer force of his conviction could substitute for the integrity of his information. That is not a battle strategy. That is a house of mirrors. And the mirrors are cracking one by one as the truth leaks out through conversations like the one we just dissected. Kendrick Lamar, for his part, has not addressed any of this directly. He has not responded to the accusations about his family. He has not responded to the disgruntled ex-employee narrative. He has not responded to the leaked tracks or the AI controversy or the revisionist history being constructed around the battle. He has done what he has always done. He let the art speak. He released the records that mattered. He stepped back. He let the dust settle. And now, as the dust begins to clear, what is visible on the horizon is the wreckage of a narrative that Drake built and that was never constructed on solid ground in the first place. It was built on the word of a bitter ex-employee. It was built on fabricated intelligence. It was built on leaks and revisions and AI questions and manufactured outrage. And the person who was targeted by all of it, the person whose family was dragged into the public square, the person whose children were used as ammunition. He is the one standing on solid ground while the people who launched the assault are watching the scaffolding of their own construction buckle under the weight of reality. The insider's perspective is invaluable here, and I want to emphasize why. Because he straddles both worlds in a way that almost no one else in the commentary space does. He understands the frustration of the rapper who cannot get Kendrick on the phone. He has lived a version of that experience himself. He has reached out. He has passed messages through intermediaries. He has encountered the artist's partner in public and asked her to relay a request. And he was met with the same silence that everyone else was met with. But unlike the rapper who took that silence as a personal affront and turned it into a public grievance campaign, the insider processed it with maturity and grace. He recognized that the silence is not about him. It is not about the rapper. It is not about anyone individually. It is about the impossible position the Compton artist occupies. It is about the reality that when you reach a certain altitude, the atmosphere changes. You cannot breathe the same air. You cannot maintain the same connections. The thinning of the social oxygen is not a choice. It is physics. It is the inevitable consequence of reaching a level that no one else in your field has reached. And that is the fundamental difference between the two sides of this entire saga, and I want you to really absorb this, because it is the thesis that ties everything together. One side, the side Kendrick Lamar occupies, operates with a recognition of reality, with an understanding that relationships evolve, that access is contextual, that silence is not hostility, that the passage of time changes the terms of every connection. The other side, the side Drake occupies, operates with entitlement, with a belief that past proximity guarantees future access, and when that access is denied, they do not reflect. They retaliate. They take unverified information from disgruntled sources and weaponize it. They fabricate narratives. They broadcast lies. They drag families into public view. And when the truth surfaces, as it always does, as it is surfacing right now through the testimony of people who were actually there, the opposing camp and their entire operation are left standing in the rubble of their own construction with nowhere to hide and no explanation that can undo the damage they inflicted on Kendrick and everyone connected to him. The question that lingers, the one that the insider poses without explicitly stating it, the one that hangs in the air like smoke after an explosion, is this. If the foundation of the entire battle strategy was built on information from a fired employee with a grudge against Kendrick Lamar, if the most damaging accusations Drake leveled were based on fabrications, if his own rollout was plagued by leaks and revisions and AI questions and unauthorized releases, then what exactly was the victory he claimed? What was the dominance he asserted? What was the moral high ground he stood on when he told the world that Kendrick Lamar was a fraud and a fake and a hack? Because from where I am sitting, and from where the insider is sitting, the only thing that was built during this battle was a monument to recklessness. And the Compton artist, the one who stayed silent, who let the music do the talking, who refused to engage with the noise, who did not retaliate with fabrications of his own, he is the one standing on solid ground. His family is intact. His partner is unbothered. His children are his. His art speaks for itself. And the people who tried to tear all of that down are now watching the architecture of their own narrative collapse in real time. Now, there is one more layer to this that I want to touch on before we wrap, because the insider mentions something that I think is critical for understanding the broader landscape of how this story has been consumed and processed by the public. He talks about the state of hip-hop media itself. He talks about how the people who used to have credible takes have either gone silent or pivoted to bizarre tangents that have nothing to do with music. He talks about how the remaining voices in the space have turned everything into a competition of volume, of who can yell the loudest, of who can generate the most outrage, of who can manufacture the most inflammatory take about either side and get it to trend before anyone has time to check if it is grounded in reality. And he is absolutely right. Because what we are seeing across the commentary landscape is not criticism. It is not analysis. It is not journalism. It is performance. It is a theater of takes where the goal is not to illuminate or to educate, but to dominate the conversation through sheer noise and repetition. And in that environment, the truth becomes the first casualty. The truth about who fed what to Drake. The truth about which accusations against Kendrick Lamar were fabricated and which were real. The truth about which leaks from Drake's camp were intentional strategic moves and which were genuine breaches of operational security. The truth about the fact that a disgruntled ex-employee manufactured the most damaging claims of the entire battle and the biggest rapper in the opposing camp swallowed every word without a second thought, without a single verification step, without even the most basic due diligence that any responsible person would conduct before putting something on wax and broadcasting it to the world. All of that truth gets buried under the avalanche of hot takes and manufactured outrage and screaming monologues and performative outrage cycles that feed the algorithm, but starve the audience of actual information. But here is the thing about truth. It does not stay buried forever. It surfaces. Slowly sometimes. Through conversations like the one we just dissected. Through insiders who were actually present, who actually know the people involved, who actually have the context and the history to separate fact from fabrication. Through people who have nothing to gain from telling the truth except the preservation of their own integrity. And when it surfaces, it reframes everything. It reframes how we understand the battle. It reframes how we understand the accusations that Drake made. It reframes how we understand the silence of Kendrick Lamar, which was never weakness or avoidance, but a deliberate refusal to engage with a narrative that he knew was built on sand. And it reframes how we understand the opposing camp, not as the strategic mastermind they portrayed themselves as, but as the reckless conduit of someone else's vendetta. So let me ask you this, because I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you make of all of this. Did you know that the most explosive accusations of the entire battle were sourced from a disgruntled former employee? Does it change how you view Drake's strategy? Does it change how you view Kendrick Lamar and the way he has handled all of this? Do you think the silence is justified, or do you think he owes the people who helped build his career more access than he is giving them? And the bigger question, the one that I want you to really sit with before you type your response. If the foundation of Drake's entire narrative was built on lies from a bitter ex-employee, if the most damaging claims Drake made about Kendrick and his family were sourced from someone Drake never verified, how does Drake recover from that? How does Drake look at the audience that believed him, that amplified him, that defended him, and explain that the nuclear allegations he dropped were manufactured by a person with a grudge and an agenda? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Every single one of them. Because this conversation is far from over. The insider has more to say. There are more layers to peel back. There are more conversations happening behind the scenes that have not yet reached the public ear. And the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that the story everyone thought they knew about the two camps, the story that was consumed and debated and dissected by millions of people, is not the story at all. It is a distortion. A funhouse mirror version of events that was shaped by a bitter ex-employee, amplified by a camp that did not check its sources, and consumed by an audience that had no way of knowing what was real and what was manufactured. Think about that for a second. Really let it marinate. The person who stood on the world's biggest stage and accused another human being of the most heinous acts imaginable did so based on intelligence that a vindictive former staffer handed him on a silver platter. There was no investigation. There was no corroboration. There was not even a cursory phone call to verify whether the source was credible. There was only ambition, recklessness, and a willingness to believe whatever confirmed the narrative that was already being constructed in his mind. And that is the part that should disturb every single person who consumed this battle in real time. Not just the fabrication itself, but the eagerness with which it was received. The speed with which it was deployed. The total absence of any internal checkpoint that might have paused the rollout long enough for someone to ask the most basic question of all. Is any of this actually true? That question was never asked. And, because it was never asked, lies about a family were broadcast to the entire planet with the full force of a global celebrity's platform behind them. If you made it to this point in the video, you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you have not already. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it, because the algorithm only pushes what the people push. And this is the kind of information that needs to reach every corner of this community before it gets buried under the next wave of manufactured outrage about this situation. And before you click off, I need you to check out the video that is about to pop up on your screen. Because the fallout from this battle is not slowing down. It is accelerating. There is another piece of this puzzle that just dropped, and it connects directly to what we just discussed. It involves the legal maneuvering behind the scenes, the corporate response from the highest levels of the industry food chain, and the warning that was just issued that nobody is talking about yet. You do not want to miss it. Click that video right now and let me know your thoughts after. I will see you over there.